Hi, Ann. All right, well, we have a few minutes. So you guys, a palpable hush came over the room. If a hush can be palpable, I don't know. But I thought I'd just start talking to you since you're all quiet. Yeah, still some good seats down in front for those of you who just come in. If anybody would like to relocate down here, feel free. Welcome everybody to Hot Science Cool Talks. Welcome everybody to Hot Science Cool Talks. It's awesome to see such a great group of people here. I'm very excited. And let us begin. I want to thank all of our supporters. There are many, and this list continues to grow. So thanks everybody who's helped contribute and support what we're doing in terms of science education, outreach, and science engagement. How about all those cool activities? I'm trying to decide which was the most exciting of all of these, and I'm hard pressed. And there's even more. So please remember to silence your devices, no conversations during the talk. And believe it or not, the 126th Hot Science Cool Talk, Living Wonders of the Hill Country, featuring Dr. David Hillis. Let me tell you a little bit about David. He's a Rourke Professor of Natural Sciences at the University of Texas in the Department of Integrative Biology and Director of the Biodiversity Center here at the university. His research expertise is in evolutionary biology, computational biology, and biodiversity. David's received many honors during his career, including membership in the National Academy of Sciences and a MacArthur Grant, which is also known, the MacArthur Grant is also known as the quote-unquote Genius Award. So that's pretty cool too. More significant than that, though, and all these awards that he's gotten, the most significant thing from our perspective is this is the 4th Hot Science School Talk that David has given since we started in 2000. So that's really impressive. He's headed towards GOAT status, greatest of all time. David has always been fascinated by creatures with whom we share their world. So much so that when David was in college and he was trying to impress and date this woman, let's call her Anne, his idea for their first date was to go out in the darkness of night into the woods to a mud puddle and sit there quietly and listen to the sounds of frogs. Genius, right? Well, I guess it worked because they've been married for 43 years. Most of that time they've been living here in Austin and in the Hill Country. And they've really come to love this as a home. And tonight David will be sharing both his expertise and his passion for these creatures of the Hill Country. And I would say after hearing David's presentation the other day that we're really in for a treat. And I would urge you to get into a meditative state. Really find your organic center. Yeah, loosen up the muscles of your shoulders. Roll your head around. Get real meditative. And imagine that your chair is going to be elevated. Go out of this room and go 30 minutes to the west of here, into the Hill Country. And imagine that, and David will be our tour guide. Please welcome David Hillis.
Thank you so much, Jay. It's such a pleasure for me to be able to have this opportunity to talk to a group like this. I love talking to audiences who love natural history and love the Texas Hill Country. So is that what we have here tonight? Yeah. That's wonderful. Such a great opportunity. So we'll get started. And the basis of this talk was that during COVID, I started writing chapters to talk to the public about what makes the Hill Country such a special place. And I wanted to target the book to landowners in particular and people who visited the Texas Hill Country, people that love the Texas Hill Country. They would see things, but despite maybe a lot of familiarity with the Hill Country, I wanted a book that gives something to everybody. So people who live here all their lives to learn something new about it, first-time visitors to learn a little bit about why it's so diverse in such a special place. And so this talk tonight is going to be organized just like I have the book organized into a series of sections. And this will be basically a little preview of what we'll talk about tonight. We'll have 8 sections of the book. I'll start out just talking about the hill country and why it's so diverse, why it's such a special place. And then we're going to do what Ann and I did on that first date and go visit a vernal pool. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. It's a vernal just means springtime, so it's a temporary pool that a lot of interesting animals live in. And then we'll move into the flowing waters of the hill country, one of the big attractions, all the beautiful crystal clear streams and rivers of the hill country, and also its aquifers and caves. Then we'll discuss the grasslands, the woodlands, backyard biology, things that you can observe in your own backyards and maybe contribute original things to science. Move into a little bit about climate and climatic adaptations of plants and animals of the hill country, and then end on talking about restoration of the hill country and the future of our natural resources. So throughout the talk, what I'm going to do is I never try to tell people what they should do to help protect the hill country, but what I do instead is try to say things that I've tried and that I find have worked on our own properties. Ann and I have a ranch out in the hill country, and I talked to a lot of people about things that we've tried and done, and I'll offer some of those suggestions as things that you may be interested in applying to your own lives. So let's just get started. Why is the hill country such a special place? So undoubtedly you all know how beautiful it is, and why is it so beautiful, and why is it so diverse? And part of that has to do with its position, its geographic position. So when I say hill country, we're really talking about this region, the Edwards Plateau, including the Llano Uplift, so basically this area immediately west of us here in Austin. And one of the things you notice about Austin is it's the intersection of all these different biotic regions, these very different kinds of habitats. And that's great for us here at the University of Texas because it's allowed us to set up a series of field stations very close by to Austin where we can set them up in these different biomes and take students out there to introduce them to all this diversity, and they can have firsthand experience doing research in these areas. And you may have read recently, we're just opening up a new hill country field station out near Hamilton Pool. We're going to begin that work on that, and that's due to a very generous gift by the Wynn family, which we really appreciate. So we're going to have field stations in all these different areas around Austin, and in a very short period of drive, students and researchers can experience all those different areas. Now, the hill country itself is interesting because to the east part of Texas, we have a lot of woodlands, and it looks much like the woodlands of the southeastern United States and northeastern United States to a large part. To the north are the grasslands of the Great Plains of the United States, the north of the hill country. To the west of the hill country is the Chihuahuan Desert region. To the south, the subtropical thorn scrub. And then we have the Sierra Madre Oriental, the mountains of Mexico, coming up through Mexico into West Texas and across the plateau. And so we have a mixture in the hill country of all the different species of these different regions. And it's a fascinating thing because side by side you find species that are found typically in the far northern regions of the United States, and things that are tropical species and desert species and East Texas wet species all mixing together in this area. So that's part of the reason it's such a diverse area of Texas. And then another big part of it is that the biology is related to the geology. The underlying rocks make a big difference to plants and animals that live here. And we have plants that include, we have rocks that include some of the oldest rocks in North America. They're rocks that are formed before there were any multicellular life on Earth, the Precambrian rocks, so the granites of the Llano Uplift, like these shown here. And then surrounding that, in a ring around the Llano Uplift, are old rocks, but they're not nearly as old as those Precambrian rocks. So those granite rocks are over 1 billion years old. And then around that in rings are successively younger and younger rocks that are exposed as you get up. So you have a lot of fossils like these crinoids in this rock that's about half a billion years old now. And then continue up to a lot of the hill country is, of course, in Cretaceous limestones. And those limestones are the youngest rocks of the hill country, although we've had a lot of deposits more recently since then that are more recent remains of plants and animals. But the rock strata are these limestone rocks. And the chemistry of those rocks is very different. Those granitic rocks degrade into acidic sands, and these limestones degrade into mostly alkaline marls and clays. And the different plants and animals that live in those conditions are quite different. And so even within the hill country, there's a lot of diversity. The rocks also, the local rocks are used as building materials throughout the hill country. And as you travel around in the hill country, not only can you marvel at the beautiful natural history, but also at the beautiful architecture in many of our small towns across the hill country. So this is the beautiful Sequist house in Mason, Texas, made from some of the local sandstones. And it's just a fabulously beautiful architecture that you can enjoy and see that they're made out of most of these native rocks across the hill country. The weather, the climate of the hill country is generally, it's a fairly temperate climate, but we do have extremes. And so even though, as we know from this past summer, how hot it can be in the hill country, we also have periods where we get these cold fronts, these Arctic cold fronts that cause very cold conditions. So the plants and animals that live here have to be adapted to take the extremes of occasional wintertime blizzards all the way up to whatever we get to 110 degrees for all summer long this year, one of our hottest summer ever on record. And then other kind of weather events also influence the hill country. We have a lot of extreme weather events. So one day I was walking around on our ranch, and suddenly this is what I encountered. And I'm just going to stop it there because that hailstorm went on for over half an hour, and the hailstones got bigger and bigger and bigger up to how they were like baseball and softball size, caused enormous devastation. And we had a beautiful spring day before it started. After that hailstorm, there wasn't a leaf on a tree anywhere around. And I was thinking, how did animals possibly survive this? What about all of our beautiful black-shinned hummingbirds? They're all dead. The very next day after the hailstorm, hummingbirds were out there and they were flying around and just like normal, like nothing had ever happened. Like, how in the world did they survive that when I could barely survive and find shelter to survive that hailstorm? So all these different features I've talked about contribute to some of the reasons that we have lots of what are known as endemic species in the hill country. That means that they're species that are found in the hill country and nowhere else in the world. So if you want to go enjoy these species, you have to come here and see them. And this includes lots of surprises. Many people are amazed to find out that biologists are still discovering new species all the time. And of course, a lot of those are microorganisms and small things that are easy to overlook, but some of them aren't. So here's a big surprise. This is a beautiful flower that's endemic to the hill country, and it wasn't discovered and named by scientists until this millennium, until about 2003, described here by one of the botanists on the University of Texas campus, Matt Turner. And some of those specimens came from our ranch out at the hill country in Mason County. And I've tried to make a sort of a complete biological inventory of our species. And in doing that, we've made lots of discoveries of things that nobody even knew occurred in the hill country. So there's no doubt there's lots of discoveries to be made. So any of you who are thinking about you like an explorer heart and think that the world is all known, become a biologist, because there's lots and lots to do in biology that we don't really yet know about. So one of the interesting habitats on the hill country are vernal pools. These are these temporary springtime pools that fill up with spring rains and then dry up in the summertime. And that's a very important aspect about that, because since they dry up, they contain no predatory fish. And so there's a huge community of organisms that live in these vernal pools. And probably any of you, when you were kids, you went and loved to run around and jump in little mud puddles and play in mud puddles. Well, it's a great thing to do as an adult too, because there's a whole world living there that you probably don't realize is right beneath your eyes. So one of my very favorite organisms of vernal pools is this creature. This is a tadpole shrimp, it's called. A lot of people see them and think they're seeing a tadpole, but it's actually a crustacean. Doesn't that look prehistoric? Look like some kind of, and in fact, in the fossil record, you can find animals that look very much like this from a quarter of a billion years ago, 250 million years ago. You find this group in the fossil record, and they haven't changed all that much over that time. Morphologically, although they, of course, change in other ways. And this beautiful organism is very abundant in a lot of these vernal pools across the hill country. And you come there, and it's like, well, this was a dry mud hole. I mean, there was nothing here a month ago, and now it's got water in it, and all these weird-looking crustaceans are swimming around. How did they get here? And the answer is that these animals lay their eggs in these little temporary pools in the springtime, and they fill up. Well, the eggs are already there, actually. And then the water comes, the animals hatch out. They live for a few weeks, they feed, and they breed, and they lay more eggs. And then it dries up. In the summertime, it starts blowing dust around, and these little eggs get blown around in the winds and in the dust and settle in little low areas. And any low areas that get water in them the next year, the new tadpole shrimp hatch out, and we have another generation of tadpole shrimp. So I'll show you a little video here of what they look like in life. Here's some in a little pool on our ranch, and these are swimming around. And this one you're going to see in a second is actually laying its eggs in the sand. You see it digging out in the sand there. And isn't that a fascinating organism? Something you can look for that in all around our area. Really interesting creature. All right, well, you could tell from the opening story that Jay told, I'm a real frog fan. I love frogs, and frog choruses especially. If you go to a pool at night in the springtime, under the right conditions, there's nothing more fascinating, to me anyway, than sitting around and listening to the symphony of frog calls that are around us. All these frogs have specific calls. The males are calling to attract females, and we have quite a diversity of frogs. And so this is a great way to go to a nighttime concert that you're going to hear just a fabulous symphony of voices. And if you've never been to a frog chorus, I thought we'd simulate that tonight. All right, so you all are going to be the frogs. And what we're going to do is I want everybody to think of a phone number or some kind of long number. It could be a social security number, any kind of number like that. And just take the last number that you thought about. So if your phone number ended in 4, then you're going to be 4. And then you all are each going to be imitating these different frog calls. So I'm going to show you what to imitate here. So if you're let's see, let's start down here at number 1. If you're 1, you're going to be a Houston toad. And this is an endangered species that doesn't live in Houston anymore, but it lives just east of town in one of our field stations near Bastrop. Okay, so all you number 1s, you can practice that if you want. Just feel like, go. Let's hear it. Oh, that's pathetic. Okay, well, let's see if you can do better on number 2. Your number 2 is your Woodhouse's toads. And if you get a number, you can't do the call. You can pick a different species if you want. So here's a Woodhouse's toad. This is actually a trill too, but it's a much lower frequency trill. So see if you can tell the difference. It's actually a trill. It's just low frequency, all right? And then our third species of toad we're going to do is the one you may have heard most commonly around town, the Gulf Coast toad. And this one goes like this. It's kind of a rattling trill. And actually, if you learn to do these calls, you go to a frog pond and imitate them, you'll get the female frogs coming to you rather than me. So that, you got that going for you. Leopard frog. This one sounds like it's laughing at you. And this is a Strecker's chorus frog. This one, it's a high frequency little peep, like a high frequency whistle. And actually had to get my audiologist to adjust my hearing aids, so I have a special setting to hear this frog, because I thought they were going extinct on my ranch, and it turns out I was just going deaf. So now I have a special frog setting on my hearing aids. And then spotted chorus frogs, this one's like probably the closest we have to a ribbit. The narrow-mouthed toad, this one sounds like a high-pitched sheep bleat. Okay. The green frog, to me, sounds like a flat banjo. The gray tree frog, another trill, but it's a shorter trill. Can you do that? And then finally, the last one we're going to do, if you're a Couch's spadefoot toad, yeah, I hate to use. Anna always gets upset when I use this description, but it sounds to me, a chorus of these sounds to me like a fraternity late at night, kind of throwing up. All right, so everybody have their frog, and what we're going to do now is everybody, I want you to call, close your eyes, and make your call. And then imagine that you're a female trying to pick out your call from among the calls. All right, is everybody ready? All right, let's go. Let's hear it. Okay. That is fabulous. Y'all are a great frog chorus. That's a reasonable approximation of what it really sounds like. And it's a fabulous experience, and you should really go out and try it. Okay, well, we're going to move now into the flowing waters, and of course this is very important for Texas, for the human population of Texas, because the aquifers of the Everest Plateau are the source of our fresh water for most of the state, either directly by people who are drawing water right out of the aquifer, or the water flows out of the aquifer into springs, which flow into streams, which flow into rivers, and those rivers supply fresh water to most of the rest of the state. So this is really critical. Of course, it all starts with a raindrop, and then it percolates down through the soil into this giant sponge-like structure that we call an aquifer. It's like a giant underground sponge, and of course has lots of caves and caverns and beautiful structures. So the caves of the hill country are another big attraction. And then in these aquifers, there's another community that lives there that never sees the light of day. And one of these creatures is this beautiful Texas blind salamander. And of course, right here in Austin, we have another example of that. Right under our own city streets, deep underground, is the Austin blind salamander. One of the prettiest salamanders in the world, I think. This beautiful lavender color, and herpetologists at least come from all over the world to see this beautiful species. And in spite of the fact that we're in a big city like Austin, just to emphasize how much we don't know about the biological world, we didn't discover and describe this species until about 20 years ago, in this millennium, in 2001, actually, I think it was. And so even right literally beneath our own feet, in a city that's had a major university and lots of biologists studying, we're still finding new things about the living world. One of my very favorite childhood memories is going out and capturing fireflies or lightning bugs. You may call them by one or the other. They're actually beetles, so they're neither flies nor bugs. But these fireflies, when I was a kid, they were everywhere, up and down our city street and our neighborhoods, all over the place. And we would catch them and put them in a jar for a while and make a lantern out of them and then let the fireflies go. And unfortunately, most people don't really get those opportunities anymore because fireflies have crashed all over the place. And this is what we're seeing here is a time-lapse photograph along a hill country river. And this is the kind of habitat they like, these kind of moist habitats along our streams and rivers. And so you're seeing all these flashes in kind of greenish yellow are the fireflies displaying. And then of course it's time-lapse, so you can tell the rotation of the Earth from the stars up there in the sky in the background. But this is kind of what my childhood looks like, and yet today it's very unusual to have this opportunity to see fireflies like this. Now, how many of you in the past, this calendar year, have seen fireflies in Texas? Okay, so it looks like about maybe a quarter of the audience, and that's that's a real shame. We used to have them in my backyard in Austin all the time, and I never see them anymore. So what's happened? Why do they decline so much? Well, it's a couple of different reasons. Part of it is because of loss of habitat. So the reason they like those streams and rivers, what we're seeing here is the male fireflies flashing and trying to attract their mates, and then they would breed and lay their eggs in kind of rotting vegetation, rotting logs and the like. And then their larvae are called glowworms. They actually have a little lighting structure as well. And the glowworms feed on soft-bodied animals like earthworms. But when people buy up property along rivers, what they often do is they clear out all the natural vegetation, they take all those rotting logs away, and they plant nice clean lawns, and then they bought the property because they love the fireflies, and then all the fireflies are gone. And what happened to the fireflies? Well, you eliminated all the habitat. And the other big thing that happens with fireflies is that people put up bug zappers. And why do they put up bug zappers? Well, because they don't like mosquitoes. But mosquitoes are not attracted to bug zappers. All those zapping you hear, they're killing off moths and fireflies and lots of other beneficial insects, not doing anything for the mosquitoes. But a bug zapper can literally wipe out a population of fireflies in a single year locally. And so that's another big problem they've had. They still exist in parts of hill country, and I would say enjoy them while they're here. And if you want to have more fireflies, then think about getting rid of bug zappers and protecting their habitat that they need. Okay, if we go now from the banks of the river into the river itself, we're going to see, that's of course one of the big attractions of the hill country. People love to float down our hill country rivers. We have beautiful crystal clear water. And if you float down them, make sure you bring a mask along so you can look at the amazing fauna that you're going to see underneath the water. And what we're looking at here is this is a kind of a clam called a freshwater mussel, and they grow quite large. They were once quite abundant in our hill country rivers. They're much less so now. They were persecuted for many years for the button industry. They used to make buttons for clothing. Didn't have before plastics. They made them out of the shells of mussel shells. And then in addition to that, there's been a lot of siltation and degradation of the rivers. Anyway, these mussels have declined a lot, but they're still here. And you probably recognize the clam part of this, but you may be looking at this and wondering what that is. And it kind of looks like a fish, right? Looks very much like a fish. And it's intended to, it's actually a lure. It's a part of the clam. This is a structure that the clam produces, and it sticks it out here, and it wiggles it around and makes it look just like a minnow, and it's trying to attract a bass. So why would a clam want to attract a bass? Who knows? Anybody? What's that? What did you say? To eat them? Yeah, they don't eat the bass. But that's a great idea, but that's not quite why they do it. What's that? Yeah, so a lot of times if you see an animal doing something really strange and wonder why it's doing it, more often than not, it's because it has something tied with reproduction. And that's exactly what they're doing here. They're trying to attract the fish, and the bass comes up to eat that, what it thinks is a minnow, and the clam has a surprise for it. The mussel expels out thousands and thousands of its young, the little tiny, little miniature versions of itself called glaucidia. And those glaucidia, these young mussels, clamp down on the gills of the bass, and the bass is startled and it swims off, and then it disperses the young of the clams. And at the same time, the clams hang on there and parasitize the bass for a couple of weeks, where they use the blood supply on the gills of the bass to feed. And then once they grow big enough, they drop off, and they're now far away from the parents, so they disperse. The clams can't move, but they can use the bass to disperse their young around. So it's a fascinating reproductive system. And interestingly, the different species of mussels have lots of different kinds of lures. So some have these little minnow-like lures. Some have lures that look like earthworms. Some have lures that look like crayfish. And each of those is trying to do the same thing, is to attract its host species of fish in order to complete its reproductive cycle. As I said, the rivers of the hill country themselves are an attraction. This is one of my very favorite rivers of the hill country that forms the western border of the hill country, the Pecos River. But if you've ever driven out I-10 to West Texas and looked down when you crossed the Pecos, you probably were pretty disappointed. You thought, that's the mighty Pecos River. It looks like a little, barely looks like a little mud creek. And that's because most of the water from the Pecos that comes from New Mexico, it's sucked up by agricultural interests from New Mexico. By the time it hits Texas, it's really nothing but a little muddy trickle. But then, just a little bit south of I-10, it begins to have huge springs that issue into the Pecos from the Edwards Plateau and from the Stockton Plateau on the other side of the river. And the lower canyons of the Pecos are one of the most spectacular places in Texas. Now, they're pretty remote and they're hard to reach because there's so few, it's all privately owned land out there. There are very few public access points. So about the only way you can do it is like my son Jonathan and I are doing here in this canoe, is take a canoe or kayak trip down the Pecos, and it takes a fairly long time. It's about a 130-mile stretch from I-10 down to the border. But it's one of the most spectacular experiences because it's a very remote area, fabulous animals, fabulous plants, and in addition to that, it also has beautiful artwork by the Pecos people who lived in these canyons and rock shelters of the Pecos for millennia. And so this is one of the beautiful cave paintings that you can see along the way. I think this is supposed to be a shaman, I think, but looks more like a salamander to me. But I guess everything looks like a salamander to me. And there's also gorgeous rock carvings as well. So this is Jonathan and myself examining these rock carvings and trying to imagine what they were drawing and telling stories. And a lot of these are about hunting stories and hunting scenes. They probably sat around and you imagine this was the entertainment of drawing these stories about what had happened in their lives or places that they had been. So it's just a beautiful experience. Next part of the book goes into the grasslands of the plateau. And the Edwards Plateau is kind of a mosaic of grasslands and woodlands. So we have woodlands coming from the east and grasslands from the north, and they interdigitate and mix in all kinds of interesting and complex ways. Unfortunately, the grasslands in Texas are one of our most endangered ecosystems because they've been highly abused by overgrazing over the years. And so one of the things of great interest now to a lot of Texas landowners is restoring a lot of those native grasses that we have in our grasslands of Texas. And they're much hardier grasses. They're able to withstand droughts like we just went through. They don't require fertilizer. They don't require a lot of supplemental water. And so they're much more valuable, actually, to the landowners than a lot of the introduced things that have been replacing them since. And so now there's a lot of efforts underway to figure out how to bring the native grasslands back. So parts of the book discuss the different techniques that we can use for doing that. And of course, grasslands are not just about grasses. They actually have lots and lots of plant diversity. The title of my book is actually related to that. I wanted to pick a title, Armadillos to Ziziphus, that was A to Z, but I wanted to also pick an animal that everybody knew about, armadillos, and something that most people probably didn't know about, Ziziphus. And if you're wondering about that name, Ziziphus, it's a plant, it's the common name lotebush, and it's actually quite common across the plateau, but it may not be one you've ever noticed. And I chose that in particular because I was consulting with a landowner one day who wanted to figure out how to bring quail back to his property. And I went around and toured with him and saw what he was doing. And he was doing a lot of clearing. And one of the things he said, we came to a lotebush, and he said, oh, I'm getting rid of all of those. I said, well, don't you want quail? And he said, well, what do you mean? It's like, that's just a thorny bush. It's like, yes, but that bush is really critical for the quail. They need it for cover from predatory birds. And if you just have nothing but an open grassland with nothing but grass, there's no cover for the quail. And the lotebush also produces a very nutritious berry that the quail love to eat. So you're taking away the food and the shelter for the quail, and of course you're not going to have any quail. And so he really opened his eyes to the importance of some of these species that we have in the hill country that you might not otherwise appreciate, including a thorny bush like lotebush. So the flowers of the hill country are one of the, they're one of the big attractions for people in the springtime. We have fabulous displays of flowers. But have you ever thought about the reasons that flowers are so beautiful and diverse? Most people realize that they're trying to attract pollinators, but the diversity in the colors are directly related to the kinds of pollinators that the plants are attracting and using, again, for their reproductive lives. The pollinators are going to spread the pollen from one plant to another and therefore allow them to reproduce. And so you have plants like this one, this dayflower, this very open-shaped flower with bright blue, well, blue and yellow, in fact. And blue and yellow are very attractive to bees. And so you know that's a bee-pollinated flower because it's open and it's colored blue and yellow. And then you have other flowers like this one, this tubular red flower of the standing cypress. And those red tubular flowers, red is very attractive to hummingbirds and to butterflies. And they both have these nice long tubular, nice long tongues that can stick down into the tubes and get the nectar reward that the plant offers. And so that's really what these showy displays are doing, is trying to attract lots of different pollinators. Now, the other important aspect about grasslands that you may not have thought about is some of the animals that are important to maintaining the grasslands. And one of my very favorite ones is this creature, the dung beetle. And if you've seen a dung beetle, you've probably seen a male dung beetle rolling along this ball of dung like this. There may have been a female riding up on top or following along behind. And once again, this is connected to their reproduction, right? So this male dung beetle will take this ball of dung that he's gathered and go off someplace and dig a hole and put the dung in the hole, and the female will go in there and lay her eggs, and then when those eggs hatch out, the larvae feed on that dung that's been provided. Now, that's what the dung beetles, from the dung beetles' perspective, what they're doing. But in addition, they're aerating the soil and they're fertilizing the soil with dung. And this is what really a healthy dung pile should look like minutes after it's dropped from a cow or other grazer, is you should see a mass of dung beetles like this clearing away the dung. And at least in the growing season, this is what it looks like on my ranch when we have a pile of dung that's deposited on the ground. It doesn't last more than about 15 or 30 minutes before the dung beetles have gathered it all up, carted it away, and buried it. And that not only eliminates the dung from the surface, so it doesn't wash off in the next rain and pollute the waterways, but it also aerates the soil and fertilizes the soil. And this is absolutely critical for a healthy grassland. Now, the ironic thing is that if you eliminate the dung beetles, then the dung accumulates on the surface and all kinds of nasty things breed in it. And so nematodes, for example, and then the nematodes hatch out and crawl up on the grass stems, and cows eat the nematodes and they get infected with them, and the cows are then parasitized. And then the rangers come along and say, I got to get rid of these nematodes, and so they apply some kind of vermicide, a worm basically insecticide, but for worms, for nematodes. And one of the most common ones to use is called ivermectin. You may have heard about that with, it's connected to the COVID epidemic. But in any case, ivermectin is highly toxic, not only to nematodes, but also to dung beetles. And so a lot of that ivermectin ends up in the cattle dung, and then it kills the dung beetles, and you eliminate all the dung beetles. Well, then what happens? You accumulate more and more dung, you get lots more nematodes, you have to use more ivermectin. It's a really vicious circle. But if you don't use the ivermectin, then the dung beetles clean up the dung, and you have much less of a problem with nematodes. And if you have any problem at all, there's other choices of things that you can use that are not toxic to dung beetles. And so people are beginning to appreciate, ranchers across Texas are beginning to appreciate how important the dung beetles are, and thinking about ways to bring them back and to protect them. To the extent now that we have ranches, is one of my ranch neighbors who has this beautiful sculpture of an ode to dung beetles. So you can drive down Fly Gap Road out in Mason County, you'll get to see this beautiful roadside sculpture. Now, it's not just dung beetles that are being poisoned, that we're poisoning all kinds of insects. And insect decline in general has been problematic for lots of species because insects serve as the food base for birds and for lizards and for frogs and for all kinds of animals. And so quail are an example of that. I already mentioned quail in context to the Ziziphus. But one of the reasons quail decline is because a lot of their food bases decline. And so if we really want to protect other species like quail and bring them back, it's not only important to provide appropriate cover for them, but also to protect the insect base that they use for food. And then, as I said, a mosaic of grasslands and woodlands. We have some beautiful canyons and protected areas with gorgeous woodlands. This is actually near the site of our new Hill Country Field Station. It's a beautiful little glen full of all kinds of ferns that you might see if you were in the nice East Coast somewhere, or even in the Northeast. And many of the same species are there. And then, of course, the woodlands themselves, we do have actually some spectacular falls in Texas, especially across the Hill Country. It doesn't occur quite when you think it would, like in the Northeast, you think of fall being maybe October or November. But for us, it's after we have our first freeze, usually in December or so. And if you go out in the Hill Country, you'll see beautiful scenes like this with the Spanish oaks turning red and the live oaks remaining green, and this beautiful red and green mosaic. And of course, out at Los Maple State Park, you can see some of our sugar maple relatives, the big-tooth maples, turning brilliant colors as well. So there are opportunities for beautiful fall color as well. These woodlands are the home for lots of other kinds of animals. And I love snakes. I realize everybody's not a snake fan. But even if you're not a snake fan, you have to admit, this is a beautiful snake. This is actually one of our few venomous species. It's called the broad-banded copperhead. And when you see a snake pattern, you have to think a little bit about why is it colored and patterned like that. And in this case, it obviously has these alternating colors of this beautiful deep burnt orange color, nice UT color, and a much lighter kind of tan color. And if you think about that, those are the same colors you see on the opposite sides of fallen oak leaves. So one side of an oak leaf will kind of have this rusty color, and the other this lighter tan color. And these copperheads live at the base of oak trees, so they live in oak litter, and they're beautifully camouflaged there. And the reason they're there is because one of their favorite food items, especially in the late summertime, are dog-day cicadas. So in the late dog days of summer, we get emergence of these beautiful creatures. This is a freshly emerged dog-day cicada. If you've never seen one, you've almost undoubtedly heard them around town. I'll just play the calls of a couple of species. And once again, we have a lot of species, and you can again distinguish them by their calls. And so the males tend to chorus by species. So all the males of one species will go to one oak tree and try to attract the females, make enough noise, and they're competing with another species, making another call somewhere else. And so here are a couple of our local species. This is see if this doesn't sound familiar. Yeah, I bet you recognize that sound, right? You hear it all over Austin. It's a really interesting call. And this is another one. Kind of has a building crescendo. Those sound familiar to you? We have those in our backyard. They make a lot of noise. One day the neighbors came over and they said, "What are you all doing over there making all that noise in your backyard?" I said, "You mean the cicadas?" So he said, "That's animals up there?" Yeah, those are cicadas singing in the trees. Okay, the Hill Country is one of the best places in the entire world to see emergence of bat flights. We have spectacular colonies, maternal colonies of bats. They spend the winter in Mexico, and then they come up here in the springtime. And these bat colonies are maternal colonies, so it's all the female bats go to the caves and have their babies, and then they return and nurse those babies through the summer. The male bats, for some reason, don't want to hang around with 3 million bat mothers and their babies, and so they're often like hanging off by themselves in little hollow trees and the like. They're here as well, but they're not in these big maternal colonies. This is almost all female bats and they're young, and their presence in such numbers that they're called what's called a keystone species. They're very important to our ecosystems. They're important for lots of different reasons. They're very important in terms of control of some agricultural pests, like corn borer moths, for example. They also eat a lot of mosquitoes, and so if you really like to get rid of mosquitoes, then you should root for the bats, not put bug zappers up. Now these are the real the living bug zappers of the world. And not only are they spectacular to watch, but then they also, of course, when they come back and roost in the caves, there's a large accumulation of guano from the bats, and that gets washed down into the aquifer, and that's actually a very good thing, because the aquifer, of course, is down there in pitch black. There's no light, so there's no photosynthesis. Where does the nutrition come from? Right? On the surface, we've got light, and plants can, through photosynthesis, can produce all this organic material. But underground, where does it? How's it all fueled? And a lot of that nutrition comes from the bat guano being washed down into the aquifer, and the bat guano then feeds bacteria, which feed little invertebrates, which feed bigger invertebrates, which then get to feed our beautiful big animals like the Austin blind salamander and some blind cave catfish that are the top predators of these underground ecosystems. So very important species, and also beautiful to watch, really fabulous to watch the exit at night, or also to watch them coming back early in the morning. Most people, for some reason, don't want to get up at the crack of dawn and see them enter back in, but that's actually my more favorite, to watch 5 million bats or some come flying in and tunnel down into a hole in the ground. It's really, really, really amazing. Now, when they do that, occasionally, one of those 5 million bats runs into another one and crashes, and we have a bat on the ground, and so there's lots of other animals there waiting to prey on the bats. And a little bit before the bat emergence, these things start to show up and watch the bats, watch the caves as you're watching the caves for the bats to emerge. So you're likely to see like a western coachwhip, for example. They have this beautiful periscope behavior, and this snake will show up, it knows the bats are going to emerge, and it sits there and watching. As soon as there's an accident, it rushes in and grabs a little bat snack. There are a lot of things you can do in your own backyards to study the biology of the Everest Plateau and even make unique contributions to science. One of the species that we have that everybody loves are our hummingbirds. We have abundant black-chinned hummingbirds. We have a few other species that come through in migration, but our primary species that breeds on the Everest Plateau is the black-chinned hummingbird, and they're present in remarkable numbers. So if you put up a hummingbird feeder, you're likely to see a scene like this one on our front porch at our ranch. And I can sit and watch hummingbirds forever. They're amazing in that they're the only birds that can fly in every direction. They can, of course, hover still there, but they can fly up, they can go down, they can go forward, they can go backward, and they're really acrobatic. So I'll show you a little video clip in slow motion. We can look at hummingbirds in flight, and you can see some of the amazing little acrobatic moves they make. The males fight with each other. So you're going to see here in a second another male fly in and he's going to attack the other. Those two males go off and have a little sword fight with their beaks. And this is something that I never get tired of watching our beautiful hummingbirds. But there are other creatures that you might look for as well. And the Everest Plateau is a great place to look at these organisms, lichens. And a lichen is it's a mutualism. It's actually a cooperation between a photosynthetic alga and a fungus. And the alga gets, it uses photosynthesis to produce nutrients that it shares with the fungus, and the fungus actually pulls up minerals and other nutrients out of the rock or the tree or the rotting wood that it's on and feeds to the alga. And the two live in a close relationship called symbiosis. And they're really fascinating to look at and watch. If you pull out a hand lens and look at the diversity of lichens up close, you'll be amazed at how spectacular they are. Lots of different species here, all competing with each other for mastery of this little rock. I can't emphasize enough how much people, especially after a rainstorm, go out and look at the lichens. Go out and look at our trees. One of the other things that's really important about them is that they're very sensitive to air pollution. And so they're very sensitive air pollution indicators. If you go out from way out in the hill country, you'll see way more lichens than if you come into the middle of Austin. And if you go down to, say, Houston, you're going to see even fewer of them. And that's because of the decline in air quality as we go along. And so they're used as a proxy for understanding something about air pollution in a lot of different areas. The ants, a lot of people are frustrated by ants and dislike ants, but that's largely because of just a couple of introduced species that don't belong here, like fire ants, really annoying, nasty animals that bite and sting. But you may be annoyed by this species as well, but I would encourage you to just think of, oops, sorry, go back to the ant. This is a Texas leafcutter ant, and right here in Austin we have Texas leafcutter ants, and sometimes gardeners get frustrated because the leafcutters come in and they chop up all their ornamental plants and carry them off. But what are they doing? They're not actually eating the plants. What they're doing is these are agricultural ants. They go down into their underground fungus gardens and feed these plants to their growing fungus. And then they eat the fungus. That's actually what their food source is. So this little ant here is carting off this little bit of plant to feed to its fungus garden so it can feed the colony on fungus. So really a fascinating thing. If you start watching them, it's all kinds of interesting things and behaviors that you can see from these ants. This is one of our most commonly seen spiders in our across the hill country. They're very common, and this is known as a riding spider or a zigzag spider, and it gets its name because of this structure here, this kind of zigzag structure. And this was the inspiration for the children's novel Charlotte's Web, where these riding spiders riding in their webs. Of course, they're not spelling anything, but what are they doing? So I'm going to just open this up to some questions. Do you have the microphone? You can see if anybody who has an idea about why this spider is making this design in this web. Anyone have an idea? There's a couple over here. Let's get this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably because they're trying to attract things like bugs to eat.
That is a great idea. So attracting bugs to eat, and that's one of the hypotheses that biologists have come up. Hypothesis is the fancy word for this is my idea for how this works. And they are reflective of UV light, and some insects are attracted to UV. But so far, nobody's been able to provide very good evidence that that actually works. But that is an idea that biologists have thought about and proposed in the past. So that's a great suggestion. Have another one?
Other ideas?
How about to keep the birds from flying into their web and breaking it up?
That is another idea people have had, and I really like that idea because I walk around at night a lot on my ranch, and I'm really appreciative of those web designs because it makes it much less likely, makes it much easier for me to see the web. And so people have thought that maybe that's part of it, is they're trying to actually make the web more visible, especially to large animals like birds that might fly through and bust up their web, and then they have to build a new one. So that idea has a fair amount of support in the literature right now. Any other ideas?
So could this be like the zebra stripes and confusing to flying insects?
That is a great idea that I have not heard before. It may be in the literature, but I haven't actually read that one. But that's a very good idea that I think could bear study. Yes, idea right here.
I think they do that because they know that zigzags are awesome.
Because they're awesome. Well, I appreciate your idea and enthusiasm. Excellent idea. Anything else? It does look awesome, I have to agree with you.
I think it's because flies can get trapped in there.
You think it's actually so it makes the web more effective to catch the flies?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And the only problem with that is that it's really just very loosely attached. Whoops, sorry, I went wrong here. It's just very loosely attached to the web, and it doesn't seem to serve any kind of entrapment function. But that was a really good idea. It could work that way, but it doesn't seem to actually have that function. There's one down here, Jay.
Maybe they do it so they don't attract any creatures that are not supposed to get in the web and they don't want to eat.
Yeah, so it could be actually repelling something that they don't want to get in the web. That's a really good idea as well. Let's just take one more here.
Is it related to mating?
Yeah, so remember I said, if somebody's doing something weird, it's probably related to mating. And that's probably the idea that has the most support right now. A lot of these ideas actually have some support, but we really don't know yet. This is an area where you can go to your own backyard and maybe design some experiments to test some of these ideas. But one of the thoughts is it's the females that make these structures, and the webs that have a nice big zigzag structure are much more likely to have a male spider in them. And so it's thought that they may actually be attracting the females, in this case, maybe trying to attract the male mates. So those are all great ideas, and I don't think any of them are wrong. It may actually be that there's lots of functions. It does several of these things. But this is an area where you can go to your own backyard and maybe test some of these ideas and contribute to the scientific literature on this topic. The seventh part of the book is about the climatic adaptations of the plants and animals of the Everest Plateau. Remember, I talked about the fact that our climate varies quite a bit through the seasons. We have these very cold periods and warm periods. And the animals that live here and survive here long term have to have mechanisms to survive those extremes. And so, you already know that I love amphibians and love toads. I try to attract toads to my yard every way I can, and I love to watch them. They're a lot of fun. You can take bets. Which of these two toads is going to get that grasshopper there? Here's the grasshopper. There, toads. You got your bets? Place your bets, I guess. Go and see. One on the top makes the first move, but misses. Another one comes. Okay. I filmed this on our front porch on a summer day when it was about 95 degrees out. Now, why that's significant is that that's above the critical thermal maximum, the highest temperature that a toad can tolerate. If you have a toad at 95, it would die. And it was 95 degrees out, so think to yourself, how are these toads doing that? Well, the reason they're doing that is I keep a nice little wet patch of soil, I wet with the hose next to this, and the toads can sit there, and then they pull water up into their skin through capillary action, and then their skin, it may look dry, but it's actually quite moist, and then they cool themselves through evaporative cooling. So if you've ever had like a swamp cooler, it works by the same principle. Or if you know in a summer day you're very hot and you get in a swimming pool, as soon as you get out you're wet, you're cool for a few minutes until you dry off. The toads do the same thing, except they can have a mechanism to keep their skin moist, and they can use evaporative cooling to cool their whole body temperature down. So the body temperature of these toads was in the 70s on a day when it was up in the 90s. So that's how effective this mechanism for cooling is. And so the animals that live here obviously have to have adaptations like that to make it through our hot summers and also make it through our cold winters. And a lot of the species have cold winters, have adaptations for, there's really two ways to solve that problem. You can figure out a way to stay here and endure the cold, or you can migrate and leave. And one of our most amazing stories of migration are monarch butterflies that fly through the whole country in the spring and in the fall. And where are they coming from and going to? Well, they spend the winters down in Mexico in some mountains, fir forests in a little mountain range in Michoacan, Mexico. And then those monarchs in the springtime migrate northward up through Texas, and they lay their eggs on milkweeds, and we have another generation of monarchs here in Texas, and that next generation flies further north, and the next generation flies further north for 5 generations through the year. And the 5th generation then, as the days start getting shorter again, like this time of year, those monarchs up in north of us are now thinking, we gotta head south. And they go into what's called reproductive diapause, which just means they shut down that reproductive system, and then they just start migrating. Now think about this, these monarchs, it's been 5 generations since their ancestors made that trip northward. How do they know where to go? That all has to be encoded in their DNA, the cues about where they go. These monarchs that haven't been down to Michoacan ever before and haven't been for 5 generations know exactly how to fly back through Texas, so then we get to see them, we'll see them here next month. And then they'll fly back to Michoacan where they'll spend the winter, and then those same monarchs will come back in the spring and lay their eggs here in Texas, and then it'll all start over again. So absolutely fascinating migratory story of the monarchs. The final part of the book is about things we can do to restore some of our original biodiversity of the hill country. and to protect our beautiful natural resources for the future. So this is a photograph from my friend and neighbors, Ranch the Zeshes, who are here tonight, from a project that they're working on to restore prairie dogs. So prairie dogs were originally found in the hill country. They're being completely wiped out of the hill country. And they're another keystone species. Prairie dogs are very important because their prairie dog homes are the homes for all kinds of other organisms. So once the Zeshes reestablished prairie dogs on their ranch, then it wasn't very long before things like burrowing owls started showing up, which live in the prairie dog homes. And so bringing back some of these species and enriching our ecosystems back to their formal diversity brings all kinds of benefits. And then not only does it provide a home for all these organisms, it also provides mechanisms for the water to go back down through the ground and get into our aquifers and replenish our aquifers. So restoring some of these ecosystems is critical for lots of reasons, both biological as well as for human needs. One of everyone's favorite organisms that unfortunately we rarely get to see anymore are Texas horned lizards or horny toads. So how many in the audience have ever seen a Texas horned lizard? Okay, everybody keep your hands up for a second. I want you to put your hands down if you're over the age of 50. Okay, anybody have their hands up still? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 6, like half a dozen people around the audience or so that are under 50 who's ever seen a Texas horned lizard. Now if you're over 50, that's probably pretty amazing to you because these things in my youth were everywhere. You go to your backyard, they'd be all over Austin, every place. And they really declined a lot for a number of reasons. Importation of fire ants was a part of it. The fire ants also meant that a lot of people started putting out insecticides, which then killed off the natural ants, that the harvester ants that the horned lizards feed on. There are other kinds of problems. We've had explosions of raccoons, in part because we do a lot of supplemental feeding of deer, and most of that deer food gets fed to raccoons, and that makes the raccoon populations explode, and raccoons love to eat horned lizards and their eggs. And so all these things kind of a perfect storm for horned lizards. They really had a rough go of it. Now there are efforts underway by several Texas zoos to restore populations of horned lizards, but we need to address some of these other problems first that get in the way. And we've had a lot of progress on the fire ant solutions, but some of these other issues like the raccoon explosion have to be dealt with as well. So these two are doing something weird here. The horned lizard on top is biting the horned lizard on the bottom's horn, and you might guess again, it's probably has something to do with reproduction. And that's right, this is the male horned lizard up here, and he's smaller than the big female. And these are pretty fat little lizards, and it's pretty hard for a male horned lizard to hang on here. And so he hangs on by grabbing hold of the female's horn with his mouth. And these horned lizards are working very hard for Texas horned lizard restoration. Now, another very simple kind of change we can make that we've made at our ranch and a lot of my neighbors are now adopting is to, hunting is obviously a very big part, an important part of the hill country culture. And hunting is important now for controlling our deer populations because humans are basically the only predators we have left for deer. And so if they're not, if we don't have hunting, then we have huge explosions of deer populations, and then the deer eat all the vegetation, and it's an ecological catastrophe for the deer and for everybody else. But in hunting, one of the changes that we can make is a simple switch from lead bullets to non-toxic copper bullets. The copper bullets are just as effective, and the big advantage is that on a lead bullet, when it hits something, it's a very soft metal. It liquefies and it turns into little tiny droplets of lead that spread out through the animal tissue. And so if you eat game meat, you're actually going to get some lead poisoning from that. And if you leave behind parts of the animal from cleaning the animal, then other animals like these crested caracara are going to get poisoned by those lead fragments. And many species of birds are very sensitive to lead poisoning, even more than we are. We're actually quite sensitive as well. Lead causes all kinds of problems at any level of exposure. And so a simple switch of just switching from lead bullets to copper bullets eliminates that lead poisoning in both your food as well as the animal's food that's left behind. And so that's a switch we've made on our ranch, and a lot of other people are making that switch, and that's beginning to show an enormous change in the level of lead exposure of animals in the hill country. And then finally, our two biggest, I'll end on kind of on this point, and we'll have a few summary slides. But really the biggest, some of the biggest obstacles we face for the future, the biggest challenges we face for the future maintenance of the hill country, if we want to preserve this for generations to come, one of them is climate change. And of course, climate change is something that's going to require a lot of effort by a lot of people. But a lot of the things that we can do as individuals that make a big difference, if a lot of people do them, are actually quite easy to do. And so one of those things is to reduce fossil fuel use. Our big uses of fossil fuel are electricity production and transportation. And both those things are simple to replace with solar power. So our entire ranch operates entirely on solar power. We produce more electricity than we use every year, and we use that electricity to charge our electric cars and our electric ATVs, and it runs our solar-powered wells. And so we can actually live very gently on the land with solar power. And one of the questions I always get from people, there's all kinds of myths about solar. People say, well, you know, what happens when you have a hailstorm? Aren't all those solar panels going to be broken? Remember that hailstorm picture I showed you early on? Huge hailstorms for half an hour. That hailstorm took out the roofs of, you notice the roof colors are different on these two houses than on this one? They all used to be the same color, but the hailstorm destroyed the rooftops of all of our structures on the roof on the ranch, except for this one, because it was covered with solar panels. We did not lose a single solar panel, and the solar panels actually protected our roof. So if you're really worried about it, it's like, well, you shouldn't be any more worried about it than you are about losing the roof on your house. It's actually more durable, not less. And then the other big challenge we're going to face is about water. Water is very limited in Texas, and conserving water is very important. And there are lots of simple things you can do. One of the things we do is rooftop capture of water to use for our outdoors use, and also for giving water to our cattle. And so there's just capturing water from the rooftops is a big help. And then reducing water use. Most of the water in Texas, you know what the number one use is? It's outdoor landscaping. All of those miles and miles, acres and acres and acres. You know what the biggest agricultural crop that we produce in the United States is? Lawn grass, yeah. Isn't that pathetic? It's like we're using all this incredibly valuable water to make these manicured lawns that are actually biological deserts. And you can change that by simply incorporating a lot more native species of plants into your yard or your landscape. And those native plants will not only attract much more interesting native animals and provide you much more beautiful than a manicured lawn. And in addition, you're not going to have to water them. You'll save on your water bill, and more importantly, you'll save on those water resources. So those are just some simple changes that we can make that may seem small as individuals, but if everybody does it, it's going to make an enormous difference. So I tend to be pretty optimistic about the future. I know a lot of people who are in my position and work a lot in conservation tend to be kind of gloom and doom about the future, and we do have major challenges to face, but I think that we actually have very good solutions that we can apply, and we just need to have more information to the public about what these options are and what their benefits are. And actually, most of the things I've talked about actually benefit people economically as well as providing these enormous environmental benefits. So there are really very few reasons you can imagine to not do these kinds of things. So I'm hopeful that with just more public education and spreading the word, we can implement more of these solutions. Let me just have a quick summary of what we went through. It's this beautiful hill country, biodiversity hotspot, lots of unique species that you can't see anywhere else in the world. The aquifers in particular, they provide most of the fresh water for Texas, and they're themselves an amazing hotspot of diversity with animals like this beautiful Austin blind salamander. It's a crossroad of the major ecosystems of North America, where north meets south and east meets west, and all these species come together, so we're really lucky to be in such a biodiverse place. It's a beautiful but also very fragile ecoregion, and it's something where we're going to need to make efforts to restore and preserve the beauty and diversity for generations to come. And then finally, the biggest threats to the hill country, obviously human development is a big one, but there's ways that we can think about development of doing it in a way that we can live more gently on the land. And we can do development in a smart way that uses things like renewable energy and rainwater capture, and that will means that human populations, we're going to clearly continue to need, we're all humans, we care about where we live, but we can live in ways that are much more environmental friendly and much more protective of this extremely important land resource that we all love and share. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'll have some questions, and then at the end, if you're interested in the book, I've got some copies you can get out in the lobby, and I'll be happy to sign them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So we will have Q&A, and then we're going to have a raffle for door prizes, so hold on to your tickets. We have some amazing door prizes. And then after that, David will sign some copies of his book. So please, let's hear your questions. Pass that behind you, Bill.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Hillis, for the incredible talk. I really enjoyed it. I was wondering, aside from like some of the species that you mentioned, what other changes in biodiversity have you noticed here in Austin and the Hill Country?
Yeah, unfortunately, in recent years, we've had so much growth of Austin, and a lot of the things that immediately come to mind are losses, the things that we've kind of lost in decline. But there have been some success stories too of things that are coming back, and so I would use as an example of that. A few decades ago, bluebirds were, a species that people love to see, and they were in great decline. And so there's efforts by humans to. It turned out the main reason for that was because they nest in tree cavities, and the cavities were all being taken over by introduced English sparrows. And so the simple solution for that is for people to actually build nesting boxes for them and to protect them against English sparrows. And bluebirds have made a great comeback. And so bluebirds are actually much more abundant today than they used to be because of concerted human efforts. And my point is that we can make those efforts a lot of times with fairly simple changes and actually have success stories to talk about rather than always talking about all the things we've lost. Yeah, can you just pass it back one row? Pass the microphone back one row. Oh, you got it now. I'm sorry. I apologize. Do you have another?
Dr. Hillis. My main question was, if you had 3 things that you could tell everybody that owned private property in the Hill Country, so pretty much all of those giant pieces of land, if every single person suddenly wanted to work towards like a wildlife preservation and preserving biodiversity, what are 3 things that you would either have them change or promote, like, getting rid of their deer feeders or, getting rid of stopping attacking ant colonies?
That's a great question. I have to think about it really to prioritize them, but a few things that immediately come to mind are really appreciating our native species. So a lot of times people, they get a piece of land and the first thing they want to do is like clear everything out and plant a bunch of imported trees, and that's not a good idea for lots of reasons. Our native insects can't live off of those imported plants, and they need our native plants. And most of our native plants are much hardier. I think they're beautiful. We have fantastically beautiful, diverse native flora. And so just appreciating our native species and trying to restore those would be one big thing. The deer feeders, that's going to be a more controversial one because deer feeders have some uses and dams, but they do have a lot of unintended consequences. And so I would kind of talk to people about maybe reducing the use or finding a way to restrict what had access to that food so you'd not have problems like the raccoons. Protecting the water resources in various ways is a critical one. Not polluting the water. Also restoring and making it restoring the species to allow the water to percolate back into the aquifer. That'd be another big one. So those are a few of the ideas I would sort of emphasize. Yes?
Thank you, Dr. Hillis. My wife and I live near Georgetown. We get lots of fat frogs in the moist areas around the side of our house. And if we ever go near one, we'll notice it secretes a fluid before it jumps off.
Oh,
Just kind of wondering what that was.
But probably, I'm not positive. There's a couple different species that do that. There's some toads. Is it a toad or does it look like a little frog? Is it a little frog about that long?
Big frog.
Oh, big. Okay, that's probably Gulf Coast toad is my guess. And they do have a skin secretion that's, so if like something attacks it like a dog, they will excrete some poison, and it's actually, dogs get poisoned by toads in those circumstances. But I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to kind of see more of the circumstances, but that's kind of my guess as to what species is involved there.
All right,
Yes.
David, here we are.
If I were to, instead of using drinkable water for plants, to use rainwater would be better.
Yes. Yeah, so if you can capture rainwater, so that's why we try to capture water off of our rooftops, and they go down those gutters, and you can simply have a barrel or a tank that collects it, and then that water is wonderful water to use for your landscaping purposes. You can actually also clean it up a little bit and use it for drinking. I know there's a few people in the audience that actually exist entirely on rainwater collection. That's a tough thing to do, especially when you go through a summer like we just did, but it is possible to do it. And you can certainly reduce your water use greatly with rainwater capture. Yes?
What is your favorite animal that you've seen?
My favorite animal I've seen
Question.
in the whole world or in the hill country?
In the hill country.
In the hill country. I would have to say the Austin blind salamander, in part because it's a species that's near and dear to my heart, but it's also just a stunningly beautiful animal.
And how about in the whole world?
In the whole world, that's a really tough one. I've seen a lot of beautiful animals in the world, but I would say it's a species of frog that I discovered down in the mountains in the Andes of Ecuador that is it's a big frog, and it's stunningly beautifully marked and has painted toe tips that look like it has fingernail polish on it. And we don't actually have any idea why it does that. We think probably it's signaling its mates by wiggling its toes, its painted toes around, but we really don't have any idea. That's probably my favorite animal I've ever seen and discovered. Are we done? Yes.
What inspired you to be a scientist?
What do spiders do?
What inspired you to be a scientist?
Oh, are you interested in being a scientist? Yes?
Depends on your answer.
Okay, well, the main thing it takes to be a scientist is to love science and to want to be a scientist. And if you do that, and that's really your big desire in life, and you put your heart and all your work into that, then you can make it happen. And that's what happened with me. I loved animals ever since I was a little kid, and I always wanted to study animals, and so I just never grew up. I just kept that love right up to the present, and that's what I do now, and now I make my living studying animals all the time and to talking to groups like this. So it's been a wonderful life for me. It does take a lot of work and study, but it's something that the main thing that you need is interest and perseverance to do that.
What a great question.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So now, David will be happy to stay later, and if you still have questions, he'll be happy to answer them. But for now, we're going to give away some prizes with David's help. All right, so David, you're going to tell me a number between 0 and, oh.
You're going to draw one?
Okay, you draw.
I draw. Just going to draw. Okay, our first number is. I can't see it. Is there a number on here? Okay. Is it just the last three numbers I can read out? Okay, the last three numbers are 241.
241. 241.
Who's the winner? You got it? Okay, right up here in front.
Bring it on up.
Come on up.
Yeah. a signed copy of the painted bunting, Dr. Hillis. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next.
Our next one is, it ends in 231.
231. There's a pattern here. 231.
Over there.
231. Come on down. All right, let's do another.
All right.
Let's keep it rolling.
Okay, next one is 142.
142. Thank you.
142?
Thank you.
We have 142?
142. The perils of leaving early.
You're only going to get a few more seconds, so we're going to go for another one.
They're already on their way
Okay,
home.
254.
254.
You're over right here?
254. Going
This is
once.
a hot side of the room over here. All right. 219. 219. 219.
Here, let's have your number.
We have 219? Okay, up there.
219. You get a copy of Armadillos to Sisyphus. How cool is that? And if you stick around and crack it open, afterwards David Hillis will be out in the hallway. He'll be happy to sign it.
Okay, next one we have is 282.
282.
282? All right.
You want a higher number?
Come on down. Next one is 982.
982.
Right up front. Excellent. This is the young lady who decided the spiders made that web because it was awesome, right? Congratulations. Now you get a picture of it. Very good. All right, 309.
Okay, let's do this one. Birds of
309?
Texas Field Guide,
Oh,
309.
coming down. All right. And then we have 144. All right, coming down.
Have your ticket?
And
Hold on.
171.
Hold on.
Oh,
Hold
sorry.
on. Let's savor these moments.
Okay.
Okay, so hold your breath. It's an armadillo plushie.
Yes. Okay.
Let's see your ticket. Let's see your ticket. This is so valuable. Let's see your ticket. Thank you. All right.
171.
171. 171 will win
Who got it?
a plushie replica of the Barton Spring Salamander. Oh, they went home.
They're lost. Okay, well then 973. You're lucky day.
973. Barton Spring
All right, come on
Salamander.
down.
This is pretty exciting. Congratulations.
All right. And next up is 006. 006.
006.
We have 006? No? All right.
007 would have been much cooler.
Okay. Well, let's try 009.
009.
All
Yes,
right.
way in the back. This is a plushie of a bat.
All right. Next to get retail. And then I think we're going to end with a beautiful painted bunting. Is that right? And this is,
The final prize is not only a plushie painted bunting. Thank you, Angelina. Angelina arranged for everything that happened tonight. Thank you, Angelina. Including this. So not only is this a plushie painted bunting, but
Even sings to you.
we're told that's pretty accurate.
All right.
There it is.
984.
984.
How about that? All right.
Professor Sheila Olmsted of the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin.
All right. Thank you all for coming
Thanks,
tonight.
everybody. Dr. Hillis will be signing books outside.
Sorry to win on